afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with Kevin, international leadership coach, facilitator, trainer, and indirect force for change in the world, adding value to people's lives. This show happens every week on ebizradio.com, and you can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels available today. He's an advocate for proactive well-being strategies and the importance of healthier, more fulfilling lives in the workplace. And he's the co-founder, chief evangelist of Unmind, Steve Peralta. Steve, welcome to the Lunchtime series.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to be here.
Steve, so one of the, when I first came across your LinkedIn profile, something interesting there that I saw about it is that, what it is you do, and you specifically spoke about, you speak in your profile, you speak about the healthier, being healthier and why this is, so important in the workplace. And I was like, this is definitely a conversation to be had. We've had it before, but, I think, post-COVID, and I say that with, inverted commas, it's still really, really important. But don't you want to tell us who you are and tell us more about what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. So, like you mentioned, I'm co-founder of a company called Unmind. So we're a workplace mental health platform. Probably hear that I'm a South African, but I've been living in the UK for the past few years. I've been in the workplace wellness space for the past 11 years. And prior to that was in the entertainment industry as a singer and actor, but that's a past life. And then, I started Unmind about 5.5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. I was in the space as a coach and a consultant working with leaders and helping organizations craft strategies, well-being strategies to support their people. So it's always been a passion of mine, or at least for the past 11 years. But then Unmind started about 5.5 years ago, and we've grown quite a bit since then. So we're just under 200 people. We're a global company now. We've got offices in London and Sydney and New York. And we're working on mental health and well-being platform to help organizations and leaders and employees to change how they think about mental health in the workplace and to think about it in more empowering ways and ultimately to transform their well-being. We have this vision of helping to create a world where mental health is universally understood, nurtured, and celebrated. And we were talking about things like positive, proactive approach to mental health and well-being for some time, which is becoming, I guess, a more normal part of the conversation now. And I think the pandemic has really helped to raise awareness around just how important this is. And so I guess, in this chat would be good to speak a bit more about that and how and why we need to move beyond the primary focus on problems when it comes to mental health in our lives and in our workplaces, and instead begin to ask the question, how can we create conditions for flourishing in our lives, in our workplaces, in society? And I believe this is a really important shift for us to make.
So, flourishing, the concept of flourishing, what does that exactly mean? Because, it's as much as people have, that people have wellness programs in place and very often they sometimes do good things. But then, you have some wellness programs in place that kind of it's just a tick box exercise and they know they have it. But, flourishing is a whole thing behind this. So explain that to me. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So this is definitely moving beyond the well-being as a tick box exercise. I'm going to close this window so that you don't hear the noise outside. And it's not, and the word flourishing is not just some fluffy concept. There's a lot of rigor behind the scientific rigor. So as a psychological concept, it's a term that refers to a developing state of well-being, and it combines emotional well-being, psychological well-being, and social well-being. So you can think about it as when a person typically experiences more positive than negative emotion, is able to navigate the challenges and adversity that we'll all face in our lives. In other words, boost their resilience. It's a state where you are developing and applying your strengths, where you feel like you're adding value to the world in some way, where you are co-creating and enjoying healthy relationships with others, and where you're finding a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. And so it's the opposite So if you think of well-being as a spectrum, it's the opposite of something called languishing, which you might have heard mentioned quite a lot during the pandemic. I think Adam Grant wrote a piece on it in the New Yorker. But languishing is when you're feeling a lack of motivation in life, you're feeling stagnant, maybe a sense of emptiness, no real sense of joy. So it's not depression, it's not a clinically diagnosed mental health condition, but it's definitely a risk factor for developing depression in the future. And what's important to recognize here is that we know that we can proactively create flourishing in our lives. And we can do that by understanding and nurturing the positive, life-affirming things that I've mentioned. We can draw on the evidence base within disciplines like positive psychology and positive organizational scholarship. And importantly, we can commit to creating the right conditions that bring about flourishing, this starts to become important within the workplace. So, I think it's important that we start to reframe the conversation around mental health. So more broadly, reframe the conversation from problems to like, how can we create the conditions for flourishing? And then within organizations, how can we move away from just thinking that well-being comes down to the individual to actually, how do we create the culture that supports flourishing? So it's a very real scientific concept, and it's a really important one, I think, for us to start talking about and thinking about.
Yeah, and I think, being in a similar realm where I'm also dealing with organizations all the time, and you're dealing with leadership and you're dealing with management.
Yeah.
I think the key conversation or the key point here is creating and proactively creating a culture of flourishing. And I think, we don't do that instinctively. Yeah. First off, people don't have any structure or strategy to be able to do that or implement it.
Yeah.
And in essence, for it to exist, there has to be some kind of proactive kind of nourishment and sort of cultivation of that in itself, which is really, really, really cool. So why is it important for us to reframe the conversation around mental health? And to that point, I think mental health, I think people still think of mental health as, those depressed people, or those people that are on pills, and those people that are, need to see a psychologist every other second Tuesday.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the truth. Mental health in itself, there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
And how to actively be involved in it. There's, it's a big conversation. But why do you think that we need to reframe that conversation?
I mean, it's a really important conversation, and I think, like you rightly pointed out, for a long time, mental health has been associated with mental illness, and it's always been used interchangeably. So when we think about mental health, we think about problems, depression, anxiety, and so on. And obviously, that's part of it. And we need to support people with depression and anxiety, but typically that's about 1 in 6 people. So if we keep on focusing on that, we're not actually taking an inclusive, holistic approach. So, it's important that we reframe the conversation and move away from the primary focus being on problems and mental ill health, and how we can address things like depression and anxiety, which we still need to do. But we need to definitely go beyond that. An absence of mental ill health symptoms is not the same as mental health. It's not the same as positive mental health. And so just focusing on that, it keeps the conversation and the intervention stuck there. You're never going to move beyond that. You might reach like 0 at best. And it prevents us from empowering people and intentionally creating the conditions that then bring about positive mental health or flourishing. And the research tells us that, and this is really interesting as well, the research tells us that mental ill health, so in other words, someone with a clinically diagnosed mental health condition, and positive mental health or flourishing, they're not mutually exclusive. So in other words, mental ill health, I guess one way people have been thinking about this, and to some degree, is on the one end of a mental health spectrum, you've got problems. On the other end, you've got positive mental health. But that's not the case. The science tells us that there are actually 2 different spectrums. So you can think of mental ill health being, let's call it the x-axis, and then well-being or positive mental health is the y-axis. And we know that they are different constructs. They're interrelated, but they are different. And we also know that someone with mental ill health can still experience positive mental health, which really reframes this for us. We know that mental ill health is complex and it can be caused by a variety of factors, often outside of our control. But the science tells us that even someone with a diagnosed mental health condition can elevate their well-being and start to experience flourishing under the right conditions and with the right proactive behavior. So this really, expands the conversation. It's a more empowering one. It's a more inclusive one, and it gets us to think about this in a far more constructive way. Like I've said a few times already, it invites us to ask that question. Okay, if this is a possibility or a potential for all of us, how can we create the conditions that actually bring that about? And then within the workplace, how can we build on those factors that we know support positive mental health? And when we do so, and this is not just for the sake of it, and when people are flourishing, they're more likely to be creative, to be able to solve problems in more novel ways, to connect with others, to be more compassionate. The more flourishing you are, those capacities are more available to you compared to when you're in a languishing state. And so to me, it presents a strong argument for why this is important. It helps us to navigate and overcome some of the challenges that we are faced with, globally at the moment. So I think it's a really important conversation to consider.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, as you say, they aren't mutually exclusive, and you could see them as an axis, the x-axis and the y-axis. What's interesting is, I'm an assessor for the neuroscience for MIT's neuroscience for business program, and when you get to learn about just your vagus nerve, for example, your vagus nerve being connected to your intestines that run right up through to your brain, through the heart into your brain, and how just the intake of food and water, how that influences the brain. So just from a neuroscience perspective, there's science to support exactly what you're saying as well, that how you eat and how healthy you are from just the food intake, that in itself can play a vital role. I mean, on your serotonin levels, 70 or 80% of your serotonin comes from your gut, kind of thing. So, it can definitely have such and I think that's what, the conversation needs to start shifting. And that's why it's so important that it does start shifting, because there's far more evidence to prove the contrary, that we can actively be involved in our mental well-being, mental well-being, rather than not, right? And being passive about it, but rather being active about it.
Definitely.
So part of leaders in organizations to build this culture that supports well-being. Why is this needed? And how our leaders are actually going to do this? And what's the advice you have for leaders?
I mean, I guess I have an answer from the heart and the head. My answer from the heart is, why on earth would we not want to be part of transforming the way that we elevate lives in the workplace, rather than the opposite? We spend almost half of our waking hours at work. So, if we let that sink in, I'm hoping that can invite a more human, more soulful, more constructive way of approaching work as a leader. That seems like the right thing to do in my mind. Why would we not want work to actually have a net positive impact on our well-being? And it can have. So I think it's the right thing to do. That's one way to look at it. But obviously I know that that's not enough. So I guess the other answer is we just need to look at the research to get a good sense of why prioritizing your people and creating a positive, flourishing workplace culture. When I mean positive, I'm not just meaning happy, shiny. It's not that kind of stuff. I'm talking about a constructive culture that brings out the best in your people. Why it makes business sense as a leader. I guess there's many areas of research you could draw on, but just some that come to mind. We know, for example, that employee expectations are actually shifting now, and a lot more employees are now prioritizing their well-being and quality of life than ever before. I think the pandemic has invited that. And a lot of more people are expecting their workplaces to support this. So they're expecting this kind of positive culture, a culture that prioritizes well-being. And I think, we all know people are leaving their jobs in greater numbers. And I think this is playing a part in it. if people are sensing or seeing that leaders and organizations do not prioritize their well-being, then they'll go and look for a company that does. So well-being is definitely rising up the ranks in terms of, the importance that it has within organizations. In fact, well-being is now the top ranked trend of importance in the recent Deloitte Global Human Capital Trend Study. And I think it was 80% of leaders are now identifying it as the most important, or at least very important to their organization's success. So, there's certainly a paradigm shift at play here. And so my invitation would be, you want to be on the sort of positive side of that and not the negative side of that. There's also quality research within organizational psychology that tells us that, the higher the degree of flourishing within an organization, within your people, the less attrition there is, the less sick days there are, the less presenteeism. And we know that the higher the degree of someone's well-being and flourishing, the better they think, the more energy they have, the more able they are to, navigate challenges, like I mentioned earlier, the more engaged they are. So, in short, flourishing means the more capable they are to perform at high standards in a sustainable way. So really, no matter which way you look at it, having healthy, flourishing employees, it makes business sense. It's the right thing to do, and I want to stress that. But it makes business sense. And healthy, flourishing employees, I guess, are supported or created through a positive, people-focused culture. And so this is why leaders play a big part in helping to at least initiate or instigate or begin to co-create these types of cultures.
You know what I'm noticing?
Yeah.
I'm recognizing that, and I'm sure that you probably come across this a lot, that if you ask certain businesses, certain organizations, what does flourishing look like? They wouldn't be able to tell you.
No.
Right? Because I don't think the concept of, like, what if I have a flourishing business? What if the people in my business flourish?
Yeah.
I don't think that as a concept is something that a lot of people have attained, considered, or even realized, right? And why wouldn't you? The next question to me is, like, why wouldn't you want people to flourish? Why wouldn't you want your business to flourish?
Exactly.
Because essentially, to exactly the points you've just mentioned, when people are flourishing, there's so much more that your benefits actually, your business is actually reaping the benefits of.
100%.
So it's, you find that it's almost puts people in a kind of juxtaposition, because you're kind of going, you want this thing, but you definitely don't know how it looks. So like, until you combine that and sort of figure it out and find, and I mean, I don't know if it's not really part of the list of my questions yet, but is that part of the process that you take them through, is to sort of unravel that and sort of conceptualize what flourishing looks like?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's almost like a whole re-education and changing of the narrative across the board. It comes back to, even within clinical psychology, for the past, since the 1950s, the focus has been on reactive care, on the problem. So that's why I think workplaces being informed by traditional psychology have been just focused on the problems, and why they equate problems with mental health. So we need to, shift the narrative, which is what I've been mentioning. And I guess start understanding what flourishing looks like and what are the factors that actually help to bring it about. And you can draw on positive psychology here. You can draw on positive organizational behavior. You could look at even Abraham Maslow's work. There's certain things that need to be in place for a person to flourish. At the lowest rungs, a sense of safety and security. Their basic health needs need to be attended to. They need to feel like they belong within their environment. They need to have a sense of self-esteem. They need to be appreciated. They need to be able to develop and grow and apply their strengths within the organization, and the like. So if you understand, okay, these are the factors that human beings require for their well-being, I guess that can at least inform the question you ask: how do we create those conditions? And it'll look different from organization to organization. But the first thing you need to do is just recognize how important it is. And start to make well-being a strategic priority. It should be something that you measure, something that you then go about optimizing for. And, it hasn't necessarily been a strategic priority in organizations, but when you start to recognize how important it is, that there's a compelling argument for that. So to answer your question, there's definitely an education piece and an awareness raising piece around this, but there's a real science that you can draw on to help elevate your own understanding as a leader as well.
So for every leader out there right now listening to this and kind of going, okay, cool, well, I'm a leader of a business and I need to start doing something about it. How do we as leaders play our role in supporting mental health and well-being in our organizations? What do we do? Like, what's the first step we take here?
Like I mentioned, I think that the first thing is just recognizing how important it is and starting to make it a strategic priority. Within my organization, we measure the impact that working at Unmind has on your well-being. So, historically, people might not expect the workplace to have a positive impact on your well-being. My vision is that every single Unminder says that it does. And so we track that. And that's one of our KPIs. So and then there's various things. You can actually obviously measure the degree of flourishing within your organization, however you want to do that, but you need to measure well-being to some degree so that you can be data informed in how you approach it and set yourself, KPIs against that. So there's that. Another really important thing is recognizing just how important your own well-being is as a leader. And I'm going beyond just the physical well-being. That's super important. That's like the foundation, but also your mental, your emotional, and your spiritual. And by spiritual, I'm referring here to meaning and purpose. Your overall well-being as a leader will have a direct influence on your people, for better or for worse. And so, aside from looking after your health with some of the proactive measures you were mentioning earlier, aside from managing your stress well, studies also show that we can go beyond this. And there's a field of research called psychological capital, which has identified 4 key states of mind or types of psychological capital that plays a central role in both the well-being within your organization, but crucially also your performance, your success. And the research shows that the higher these 4 things are in leaders, the higher they are in the rest of the organization. And these things are hope, self-efficacy, in other words, your belief in yourself to be able to meet your demands and reach your goals, optimism and resilience. And these are all factors that can be proactively developed. And I guess the takeaway there is, if you look at those things, that's a positive mindset. So the takeaway here is the higher your levels of health and well-being, the more positive, and I'm not talking about like toxic positivity here where you ignore the problems. I'm talking about a constructive mindset that approaches.
Yes, I'm wealthy.
Yeah, like, no, exactly. So not that. It's about seeing the bigger picture, but then choosing to nurture and build on the things that we know will bring about constructive outcomes. So that's what I mean by positive. But the higher your hope is, the higher your optimism as a leader, the more so it'll be in your organization and the more successful the organization will be. There's a lot of research to back it up. So is that bit there? I think just reflecting on like emotional contagion and leader-member exchange, again, science you can draw on. And then thirdly, empower and educate yourselves and your managers in your organization to be able to have, first of all, conversations around mental health and well-being. And that's a good starting point. Many people don't feel equipped to have that. But then also know how to truly support your people and create the conditions for well-being and flourishing. So this could be, training, coaching, etc. And it goes beyond just the leadership and management. For organizations to truly thrive, this needs to be a whole organization approach, and this can take time. But it needs to begin with deciding to prioritize well-being in your organization. And although it's a whole organization thing I'm talking about here, obviously leaders have the highest degree of influence. People are looking to leaders for their cues. So if you truly want to create a culture that supports flourishing in your organization, it has to start with yourself as a leader.
So I mean, and I absolutely love this because, you know, I like the capital psychology, what it's called.
Psychological capital. Yeah.
That one. I love that you know, that exists, and that, you know, that you're sharing that with us. I think also as part and parcel of this conversation, you know, for flourishing to happen, for well-being to happen, that also, you know, drives it back to fundamentals of an organization, which forms part of, you know, the foundations of what they're building on.
Exactly.
And for example, like a value system, right? Is well-being even part of your value system? Because if it's not, and it's not an intrinsic space from where we actively, you know, where we actively move from and we actively behave from, then again it becomes that thing that, you know, just looks nice on the wall, and like, yes, well-being is over there. So I mean, Steve, to end today's conversation, and thank you for being here, because I love this kind of stuff, and I love that that you're so passionate about it. What would you conclude this conversation with if you had to give any advice to aspiring startup founders on you know, where do we start with this kind of thing? Because it's like, oh yeah, now you're expecting people to save the world, and you're kind of like, how do I do that? I don't know, you know, but how do you practically do that? What would you start with?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, I mean, this could apply across the board, not just to startup founders, but if I'm going to focus just on startup founders, given, you know, my background, I think aside from making your culture and your people a genuine priority right from the outset, which speaks to your values as a company, like you've just mentioned, something else that I think is really important, especially in light of what I've just mentioned about stuff like emotional contagion and leader-member exchange, where your state of mind and body and spirit has on the people around you. Definitely protect and nurture your well-being. You know, obviously starting a company is involves a lot of demand, but really proactively managing your own well-being is, based on my experience, the differentiator in your success as a founder, as a leader, and being able to be a positive force or a positive influence in your company. And I think linked to this, and this is just, I use my own experience here, and I think this is quite pervasive. So if you notice, and this might be a little bit off center, but I think it has some relevance. If you notice, let's say imposter syndrome, and I think this is quite common with, people don't speak about it as much, but I think it's quite common with startup founders, especially as your company starts to grow. I experienced it. What I've now learned through it is that imposter syndrome to me is a sign that you are beginning to fall victim to our natural negativity bias, which actually aligns with a lot of what I've mentioned today in our focus on problems. So just see it as like a clue and start to refocus your attention on your strengths and your unique capacities as a human and a leader. And then like start asking, how can I leverage these more in my role? I mean, you know, this is very personal to me. It's what I've done in my organization, in my role. I had a dramatic positive impact. You know, you can't do everything. You can't be everything. You can't be expert at everything. So rather really connect with your strengths and leverage those. Because to me, if you don't, you start to lose motivation. You get stuck in that state of anxiety and stress. You have a negative impact on people around you, and you lose your spark. And to me, maintaining that spark, maintaining that motivation as a founder is essential. You know, you're the source energy of the company. Obviously, it goes beyond that, but you know, you are the source energy of it. And so your state of body, mind, spirit is really important. And I just think, aside from staying connected to your company's vision and purpose, I think playing to your strengths as a leader is a really important way to keep your spark alive. So that's what's come to mind. Hope it's of some value to some people out there.
Absolutely, you know, and I think, you know, it does that whole saboteur that kicks into gear, and that's, you know, that you have, you know, that you just don't think it's going to work, or, you know, it's not enough, or you're not enough, or I think it applies to CEOs as well. You know, CEOs that step into a new CEO position, people who step into a new leadership position. You find that very often from a coaching perspective. That you have those conversations where you just like, well, I don't know why they gave me this role. I don't know why I'm good enough for it. And it's true, you have to get a handle on that and kind of go, okay, cool, step into what it is you're good at and really build on the strengths. I love that.
Definitely.
Steve, thank you. That was a fantastic conversation, and I love the fact that it's called Unmind, guys. So Unmind is based all the way in the UK. If we want to get hold of you, what's going to be the easiest way to do
that? You find me on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn. I haven't been on Instagram for 9 years, but the brand team of that organization is now making me start Instagram. So that'll be Steve at Unmind on Instagram. But otherwise, LinkedIn's a good space to do it.
Guys, and as Steve says, all those links will be in the description boxes below, and you are chatting to the main man, the co-founder and chief evangelist of Unmind. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, and thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, of course. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers for now.
Cheers.